Craig very much. They were very good friends, as Craig had discussed. I'll say that Craig is used to public speaking. He gets to practice this every Sunday. I am not, so please pardon the noticeable difference in our ease of presentation. I have only spoken at a funeral once before, and on that occasion, all I had to do was read a poem. So anyway, it's kind of difficult to try to sum up a person's life just in a few minutes. I tried to do that, and my brother was an interesting person, as he was so varied, very, very unique individual. And by the way, I don't know how well I'm projecting. If anybody in the back can't hear me, just put up a hand, wave it, or something like that. One thing is for certain: we, the Hoke family, are a little bit different from most people. I say this not to apologize, and certainly not to boast, but just to acknowledge that there are certain properties that make us stand out. And all of the Hoke children, of all of the Hoke children, James was by far the most extreme example of these Hoke attributes. My oldest brother was known by different names to different groups of people. So let's discuss that for a bit. I think Craig actually touched on this a bit, but just for some more detail. For a long time, I've referred to my oldest brother James, as James, but I believe that I'm the only one that actually called him that on a daily basis. In our family, we have this thing that nobody else calls it this, but I like to call it the Hoke family informal nickname. So we have my mother, Toyoko, she's the matriarch of the family, and then my father, James J. Hoke Sr., who passed away when I was young. The two of them had 4 children. The oldest was James J. Hoke Jr., and my family would call him Jimmy. Next was William, and my family would call him Willie. After that was Margaret, and my family would call her Peggy. And finally there was me, Edwin, and my family would call me Edwin. So for some reason, I didn't get a Hoke family informal nickname. And I'm still not sure exactly why. I'm not Eddie or Edgar, so I don't know, it's just, but this is okay because the Hoke children really don't use our Hoke family informal nicknames when we're dealing with people outside the family. So my sister prefers to be called Margaret. She doesn't really like to be called Peggy. My second oldest brother prefers Bill. And I think most people knew my oldest brother as Jim. However, a gang of his friends from Shippensburg State College, now Shippensburg University, as Craig has pointed out, took to calling him by the nickname JJ. Now, this was a bit of a surprise to people who aren't part of this gang, as JJ is kind of a cool, hip nickname, and cool and hip are not really Hoke qualities. But the name JJ stuck for this gang of friends. But me, having been used to the family name Jimmy, I wasn't really comfortable with this JJ hipster name. So rather than embarrassing him in front of the gang by calling him, Jimmy, his Hoke family informal nickname, I took to the most formal name I could muster. So since then, I have called him James. To me, it was only fair because I never got any sort of nickname. So, Hoke family informal or otherwise, I was always just Edwin. So why should he get a nickname? We Hokes can be a little self-centered at times. We'll talk about this gang, as I like to call them, in a bit, because they're very important to the lives of my brother. Anyhow, I think that covers it for my brother's names. If there's any more, we'll talk about it later. And sorry about that. No, we Hokes have a knack for kind of talking at length about the mundane. So anyway, if there's one thing that I can say about James, the Hoke property that he is best known for was his absolute love of knowledge, as Craig touched upon. James read constantly. His book collection was enormous. To him, acquiring knowledge was as natural as breathing. He was well-read in many areas, but most of all, I'd say the area that he really dug into was history, and especially Civil War history. He could just, and I think many of you have probably heard him, he could just rattle off long lists of names of generals and battles and history, the battlefields that they took place off the top of his head, and just an veritable encyclopedia on the topic. So I remember when some of the family were driving in Virginia, and seeing a road sign, he excitedly shouted, "Manassas, 24 miles away!" To which I responded, "I would have thought your asses would be here in the car with us." We hoax sometimes think we're funnier than we really are. This knowledge did not always translate to academic success, however. When talking about the study of mathematics, James would often relate how he had taken Calculus 1 a total of 4 different times. When the listener would respond with a befuddled look, he would add, "But I did pass it twice." This would not really help the listener's befuddlement. Leaving people befuddled, that's also a good thing. My brother, being the intellectual sort, had a fascination with games. Games of all sorts, from your classic board games — he taught me chess as a very young child — to the most complex of war games, to fantastic role-playing games, to computer games and video games. In fact, I have very fond memories of being a very young child and tagging along with my older brother Jimmy during the dawn of the video game era, when he went to the video arcade to play games, bringing his little brother in tow. He certainly did not have a lot of money to his name, but he always had quarters to give to his baby brother. That was another thing about James. He never hesitated to share what he had when he could, and help out others when he could. That was something that held us very important. As we talked about, James went to Shippensburg, studied biology, going to Shippensburg State College, now Shippensburg University. I know I already mentioned it once, but we hoax like to repeat information more than once, as we know that people like the repetition. He eventually got his Bachelor's of Science degree there in the late 70s. But this was not the most important thing he got from his days at SHIP. Being a gamer, he was introduced to a very new sort of game, sort of storytelling activity with the odd name of Dungeons and Dragons. And he struck up a friendship with a gang of like-minded people who also took an interest in this Dungeons and Dragons thing. And the friendships he made, and the friends of these friends, and the relatives of these friends represented what I believe were the most significant friendships of his life. This is the gang that knew him as JJ. One day, he brought this Dungeons and Dragons game home and introduced it to his youngest brother, and I loved it. Yeah, we hoax were nerds before it was cool. Then, for some reason I still can't quite understand, he brought this young brother, who wasn't even a teenager, to come and hang out with his college friends. Can you imagine this? So, college student, actually a fairly old one at that for the time, takes his 12-year-old brother to hang out with college friends. I mean, who in their right mind would do that? But to me, the recipient, James, was the best brother in the world. And by some miracle, this gang tolerated me. And to this day, I consider the gang to consist of some of the most amazing people I have ever met. And there are many of them in this room. And they became my friends too, and their friends and friends of these friends and family of these friends represent what I know are some of the most significant friendships of my life. So I have James to thank, and I thank him dearly for this significant portion of my life. JJ got a reputation with this gang for another one of his qualities, his ability to fall asleep anywhere. But not just his ability to sleep. He would be gaming, and JJ would be sitting at the table, eyes closed and snoring loudly. And when it came to my brother's turn, someone would say, "JJ, wake up, it's your turn." At which point, he would spring into action and take his turn with total comprehension of what was happening while he was sleeping. When he was done with his turn, he'd fall back asleep and continue his snoring. This isn't really a Hope thing. It's really a JJ thing. It's a trick I have yet to master. We have heard word from people that he's worked with that actually he also exhibited this activity. Another Hope property that James displayed prominently was taking all questions in absolute literal terms and responding in great technical detail. I think a lot of us have experienced this. For example, when you ask someone, "How are you?" we all know it's intended as a friendly and customary salutation. But not to James. When asked this question, you would get a window into every factor that influenced his physical well-being at the time. And what was intended to be a simple greeting turned into a bit of a lecture on details you might not always want to know. I admit it could become tedious to some, but I really believe that it was not James's intention to annoy, but to inform, and to provide the whole truth to any question asked of him. He sought knowledge, and he provided knowledge. And I have to admit, for good or bad, that when I'm asked any question, just a fraction of a second, my inclination is to answer the question literally the way James would. I usually catch myself and responded to the intention rather than the specific words, but not always. I am truly my brother's brother. Despite the Hope properties that run through all the Hope children, I think that people tend to observe not the similarities, but the differences between us. James, as we know, was the quirky intellectual. Bill is the consummate athlete and man of action. Margaret is a serious professional and married for many, many years to a husband so great he's practically a fictional character. And as for me, well, I guess I'll let others say, but people have told me how James and I turned out with very noticeable contrasts between us. But giving it some thought, and Hoax are, after all, very analytical, I can't help but think how much of an influence James had on how I turned out. Almost all of the things I find interesting, computers, gaming, the pursuit of knowledge, are all things I learned from watching him or things that he introduced to me outright. And some of the things that some people might consider his flaws, which are actually just strong presentations of Hoke attributes, are things that are probably a little less prominent in me because I was able to observe James interacting with the world. Deep down, James and I have more in common than most people might realize. James and I share 3 beautiful nieces, Talia, Veronica, and Elizabeth. They're sitting here actually in that order. James was not always the best with children. Now that's a Hope property, but it appears to go away completely once you actually have children. But I know for a fact that he loved them very much. James always carried baby pictures of each of the 3 nieces in his wallet, even though they're all adults. I'm sure that James was an influence on the lives of people that I've never met, and likewise was influenced by them. From what I've heard from talking with his coworkers, James was the same person at the office as he was with his family, as he was with the gang. He just was not one that put on a different face depending on the audience. He had but one face to present to the world, regardless of the situation. So we know that face was genuine. Though I don't know everybody that James knew, I must say that, to my knowledge, there is one family in particular that I would like to mention. And that family would be the Smiths. They are here. Mara, Dwight, and Leah. And their parents, Rita and Smitty, may he rest in peace, plus much of their extended family, the Lydons. Rita treated James with a warmth and caring as if he was a son. And Mara continued to stay very close friends to James and kept him as family. For that, I honestly thank you, and I believe James thanks you. Generosity, caring, kindness, these are Smith family attributes that I wish I could exhibit as well as they do. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up. Once again, thanks to everybody for coming. I know that James or Jimmy or Jim or JJ would have been honored by you all being here at his ceremony. I'm going to close with one more thing. I will not say that I love my brother James, because saying I love you to family is not really a Hope thing. But the truth is that I've always loved James, and I always will. Thank you.